Good evening. We will call the Committee on Infrastructure to order on August 23rd, 2017 at 7:02 p.m. in the Aldermanic Chamber. I will go ahead and chair this evening's meeting and will serve as clerk as well. I will call the roll. Myself, Mark Cookson, presiding. I am present. Alderman David Schoeneman, Vice Chair.
Here.
Alderman McGinnis is absent. Alderman Lopez?
I'm here.
Present. And Alderman Dowd is not going to be in attendance this evening. Also in attendance this evening, we have Director of Economic Development, Tim Cummings, as well as Downtown Specialist James Veo. And I will begin with public comment this evening, Mr. Cutter, if you'd care to join us. Mr. Cutter, your name and address, please, and then you can begin your comments. I've received, as you've provided me with a copy of your statement this evening. I've got those I've shared with the rest of the committee, so just go ahead and begin your comments when you're ready.
This evening? Well, anyway, okay, I'm going to read this off. It's Jim Cutter, 86 Palm Street here in the city. And dear Alderman Cookson, when the Gilbertsons bought 88 Palm Street, someone told them there was a gap in our property. There is a gap when the deed is written, quote, more or less 150 feet, when the actual length was 153 feet, unquote. They were so sure that person was correct, they included it in their 1971 city building permit before Joseph DeRocha died in 1972. Jim Gilbertson used the same building permit paper on May 13, 1971, as Leo and Genevieve Karen did in May 12, 1950. Since there is 21 years between dates, there could not be a gap in the 86 Palm Street deed, and confirms the Gilbertsons are guilty of criminal trespass. Every homeowner should know a gap is removed by continued and uninterrupted use of it for 20 years. Our driveway, etc., is known as curtilage because it is used for domestic purposes. And no one can claim our curtilage because it is part of our house. See RSA 173-B:10, protection from domestic violence per curtilage. Last Tuesday, the 15th, a real estate for sale sign was installed at the Gilbertsons. I phoned the listing broker, Bobby Sinyad, of the Bean Group, and told her the Gilbertsons cannot sell their property when it includes some of our land mistakenly given to them by the city that the city has failed to correct. I have a PS on this that says our property is 33 feet or 2 rods long from chain link fence on our north boundary line and the Gilbertsons' property. And I have quite a few enclosures. Some of them, most of them, I guess, except for, say, the Joseph DeRocha obituary, have been seen by you already. But what I'd like to know is, since this whole thing started with the Gilbertsons, because the mistake was made by the city building inspector. I've mentioned it many, many, many times in my visits here, that is the city who's the one at fault. And so in this particular case now, we have Gibbleson who wants to sell his property. So doesn't the real estate broker want to get a commission for the sale. The Gilles's have left, they've brought in somebody to clean up the residence, but they didn't touch the fence. So you can't mark out the actual boundary line when it has a fence there and some other things attached to it. Can the city help with a police officer to tell the Gillesons they don't have their boundary lines set up like it should be, and they certainly, of all things, they certainly can't take the fence with them when they move. So it should be taken out of there. And they do have people that can come in and take it down and do all of that stuff. But I believe a police officer, I've mentioned this a number of times, could be very, very helpful to knock on the Gilleson's door and tell them, look, you need to get that fence out of there. You're encroaching on the Cutter property, and take it from there. I was hoping that Bobby Sinyard of the Bean Group would be here to give a word or two, but she didn't make it. So let me see, and the thing that I have included here not on this group here, but okay, the DeRosa obituary. That I included with your copies to show that Gibbleson made out the building permit, and it was before DeRosa had passed on. So he was claiming DeRosa's property, and had, of course, had no business to. But the building inspector should have caught that and denied that until it was corrected. So this is what I would like to see if, say, a police officer could come by and knock on Gilleson's door and say, look, you've got to, you're infringing on the Cutter property, and you've got to take that fence out of there. So that's not much more that I can say about this whole thing. To prove that curtilage is so important, I have included as I have done in the past, RSA 173-B, colon 10, protection from domestic violence. And that says premises and curtilage right in the middle of the page to show that curtilage is that important. It's part of the house. And you can't take anybody's house. So this is what is happening. We naturally would like to get it corrected. Are there any questions on this from anybody?
Alderman Lopez or Shoneman?
Nope, it's pretty straightforward.
No questions at this time, Mr. Cutter.
Well, I hope it's not going to be put on file. I hope something is going to be done. And
Well,
like I say, I'm requesting, it's not earth shaking. It's something that will help the problem that we have someone sitting on our property. They should never have put the fence up in our driveway. That's against the law.
so
And
Mr. Cutter, just,
we're down to a pretty narrow driveway, to say the least.
Mr. Cutter, for your, just for your information, parliamentary procedure requires us, we can make a motion. Typically, the motion is to accept and place on file so that this becomes part of the public record. So we will make that motion this evening. In addition to that, it would probably be advisable with the new scenario that you've presented to us with the property at 88 Palm Street being sold, that we will again forward this off to, and you've included your correspondence to both Mayor Donchis as well as Corporation Counsel Stephen Bolton. So they will be receiving copies of this as well. And it will be our Corporation Counsel that will make a determination on what actions the city can take in light of this new situation.
Okay, that would be great.
Very good. Thank you,
All right,
Mr.
fine.
Cutter.
Thank you for your time and all.
So I will move to, actually, let's go ahead and make a motion to go out of order to accept the communication and place it on file. So any discussion with the motion of going out of order?
No.
All right. So all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Okay, so we'll move to communications. Communication was received after the agenda was prepared from James B. and Mary E. Cutter, 86 Palm Street, to Mark S. Cookson, Chair, Infrastructure Committee, Jim Donchis, Mayor, and Steve Bolton, Corporation Counsel. Subject, we want our present 7.5-foot wide driveway restored to its 10-foot 3-inch width. I will make a motion to accept and place on file. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. In addition to that, as I just informed Mr. Cutter, we will make sure that Attorney Bolton and Mayor Donchis receive copies of these so that the city can formulate a response in light of the property at 88 Palm Street being sold. Any additional questions or concerns with regard to that proposal? Alderman Shoneman.
I think all that sounds fine. I just want to point out that I think that the property has not yet been sold. I think it's offered for sale. Just
Fair point. All
That's
right,
it.
all right. So I will go ahead and craft a communication and make sure that this is included for both Mayor Donchis and Attorney Bolton to review and provide us and Mr. Cutter with a response from the city. All right. So with that being said, let's go ahead and go back to the regular order of business. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The next topic is discussion, and we have both Economic Development Director Cummings as well as Downtown Specialist Veo here to discuss with our discussion with Economic Development, the update on the one-way reversal, as well as a mobile pay app. So, gentlemen, if you'd like to join us at this point.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, and through you to the committee. For the record, my name is Tim Cummings. I'm the Director of Economic Development, and with me tonight I also have James Veo, Downtown Specialist for the city.
The floor is whomever would like to take it at this point. It's your discussion to share with us information about the one-way reversal as well as, and we had a discussion, it may have been late last week, early this week, I don't recall right now, about a mobile pay app. And so
Yep.
The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so with that being said, I thought it would be best to come before you this evening and give you just general status updates. And on your agenda, you have just a continuation of our conversation of the one-way reversal that was brought before you previously. I'd like to take a few moments tonight and have James Veo provide you with a quick status update. There is a newer conversation that has come about internally here in City Hall relative to the downtown gaining access to a mobile app for paying for meter services. I wanted to introduce this plan and program before the Infrastructure Committee, seek your input and direction before that conversation proceeds much further. Again, James Veo will discuss that. Lastly, not on your agenda, but I thought it was wise to also just provide you with a quick memo and brief update on the East Hollow Street Transportation Improvement Project. Not that we need to go into that in any detail tonight, but I thought you'd just be curious to have that memo because I know that there had been some news articles in the last few weeks on that particular project. So if you were receiving questions on it, I wanted to make sure you could be able to answer any of those questions for your constituents. With that being said, Mr. Chairman, if it's your pleasure, I would turn it over to Mr. Veo to talk very briefly about the one-way reversal and what we've done thus far.
Thank you. Let me just take a moment, just in case members of the committee were expecting conversation to be around the downtown parking and the overnight parking. I believe the proper thing to say would be that your office needs a little more time.
Correct.
That we were overambitious in trying to schedule it for this date, and that we'll have more information at our meeting in the first meeting in September.
Correct.
So the Economic Development Department is still working on it, and we will get more information. But we thought in light of us meeting that it'd be an appropriate time to talk about a couple of the other things that we've been discussing in committee and bring up one new topic. Alderman Lopez.
I know some of my constituents had been planning to watch this meeting, so do we have the date that we're going to be talking about the downtown, the on-street overnight parking?
I'm quickly looking at my calendar.
13th.
I was just going to say, is that the Wednesday?
Lucky 13, all right.
We'll have
Yes.
finance on the 6th,
Yeah,
we'll have a
finance.
Board of Aldermen on the 12th, and we'll be meeting on the 13th.
So it would be the 13th.
Okay. Like I said, I've spoken to several constituents who have reached out to me. Because of their schedules, they prefer to watch the minutes, especially when they discovered they were on YouTube. But they may want to come in person and voice their own opinions as well.
By all means, they are more than welcome to join us, and we'd love to hear from them. Alderman Shoneman.
Thank you. I did want to comment on the overnight parking issue at some point in the meeting, and only to express that a constituent has reached out to me. He's moved in, and he needs access to parking. And whether now or later. I'm just wondering, in the meantime, should I just tell him to hold off and wait? We're going to add his street as part of, it's on French Hill. Or at this stage, are we still in the mode of adding streets one at a time?
I believe that we're trying to hold off on adding streets one at a time.
Okay. I'll tell him that. I just wanted to,
Is this particular street, does he have the ability to purchase a parking permit or not?
it's Norton Street, and Norton Street is not on the list
Okay.
allowing purchasing of
All right.
parking space. He doesn't want to park on his street, he wants to park adjacent.
Understood. So I was trying to see if we had the opportunity to have him purchase it and
Not
then
yet.
be able to park elsewhere. But
That's what he
Norton's,
would like to get.
but Norton's not even on the list.
Norton's
So
not on
I believe that we've taken that street down and we'll look at it.
Yes.
All right, very good.
Thank you.
All right, so with that side dialogue, I will gladly turn it over to Mr. Veo to talk about our one-way reversal.
Thank you very much. James Veo, Downtown Specialist here at the City of Nashua. I have printed out a couple copies of the communication
Here,
to hand out.
I can take it. I can pass it around. You talk.
Thank you.
A brief recap, in 2014, the city retained VHB Engineering to review traffic patterns downtown and produce a report making several recommendations for modification to the roadway network. This past summer, 2016, at the direction of the mayor, the Economic Development Division, in conjunction with Public Works and Community Development, did seek to develop a first project, a most feasible project based on the recommendations of that 2014 report. We're here to give you an update on the progression of the public outreach based on our last conversation with Infrastructure Committee, in which we were tasked with going out and continuing the public outreach effort. To date, we've met with fire, police, planning, engineering, and made considerations of the plan and adjustments to the overall concept for the one-way reversal. We've met with nearly 100 individuals through face-to-face meeting, knocking on doors of business owners, employees, residents. We've also collected input through engagement in Facebook posts, coordinated Facebook posts throughout February and April, followed up by walk-in open house sessions in a vacant space, which is now Camaraderie Boutique. At the time, it was Positive Street Arts was occupying the space on Main Street. Additionally, correspondence has taken place over email and a series of e-newsletters, which I put out to a user group of approximately 400 people. Along the way, we've collected the sentiment and input. I have a fairly detailed Excel sheet on file, which identifies comments that people have made, gathered their sentiments, whether they were for or against this kind of proposal, and identified issues that they saw as concern, which eventually that stuff made its way into the overall concept plan where appropriate. In conclusion, we're really looking with this project to make a more intuitive flow of vehicular traffic, reduce trip diversions, eliminate conflict points, increase local access and on-street parking capacity, as well as improve the pedestrian environment and expand existing bicycle lane infrastructure, which already exists in the scope of work. We've identified a significant majority of individuals, businesses, and organizations support this, and we're here just to basically provide you that brief update and let you know that we'll be planning to come back in the fall with more information on this and seeking to incorporate this project into the annual budget and the capital improvement program.
So if I may, Mr. Chairman, just a couple additional details.
Please.
Thank you. So as Mr. Veo just alluded to, we have had various types of public outreach using both social media and traditional media. I can tell you that the Telegraph and other news outlets have written about this proposal. Beyond just the community meetings that occurred on Main Street, I do know Mr. Veo and actually the mayor went to the senior center and met with the folks at the senior center to have this very specific conversation, as well as we went to major stakeholders and employers in the downtown to bring this specifically to their doorstep. The reason why we're doing that, and we want to have this a higher level of public outreach is because inevitably, if we proceed forward with this idea and move towards engineering and ultimately construction, once we actually enter the construction phase, I foresee us hearing that folks weren't aware of it. And that's a big concern that I have. And so one of the reasons we're here tonight is to be on TV, to actually bring this to the public's attention, that yet we are still working on this, because I do fear the fact, and we are in the summer months, so it's a little sleepy, that folks will be caught by surprise. And the concept of reversing some of the roadways is a very sensitive conversation. Most recently, about a month ago, we were before the Board of Public Works to bring this to their attention. They had very positive comments about it, as well as most of the other boards and committees that we brought this before. So I wanted to provide that additional color to you before you open it up to questions and comments. But I think that this is progressing nicely. The sentiment has been productive and positive, and barring any unforeseen circumstances, it would be the desire for us to put this forward for engineering and construction in the capital improvement plan and the operating budget for next year.
Thank you, Director Cummings. Questions or comments from the committee members? Alderman Lopez.
I've received a lot of public positive response with regards to this. I know a couple of the businesses are a little bit concerned specifically about their stretch of road, like how it will affect directly them. But people who have been giving me feedback about how they travel through the city really anticipate this. And for every business that's raised concern about their individual access convenience, there have been a lot of businesses that are very much looking forward to a smoother, easier flow of traffic that benefits everybody. So I think it's definitely an impressive idea, and I think there's some tweaking that's being done, which is always a good idea, just to make sure that every scenario is worked out. But I think it's very positively received, and I'm looking forward to seeing it happen.
Thank you, Alderman Lopez. Alderman Shoneman?
Thank you. Just to get refreshed on some of the specifics, what happens to Water Street in this? Does that stay as it is?
Street has nothing.
And what about the connection, I think was that Chestnut Street over? What happens to that?
Water Street remains two-way.
Okay.
And then Chestnut, is that I always confuse Chestnut and Walnut. Is Chestnut the one?
Oh, maybe it's Walnut, the one that comes
Yeah,
past the
Chestnut's
Oval.
not part of it, actually.
On the east side of the Oval, and it comes up to that stop sign there with the Mexican restaurant over
Means
there, and
one
Clock
way.
Tower Place.
Yeah.
Walnut
So-
one way.
So that's only gonna be one way to the
Yeah,
left?
so-
You're not gonna be able to go right anymore at that point?
No, it's so essentially the oval, the way it functions as like a big circle, its pattern won't change, but what will happen is where cars are currently coming out of West Pearl Street and hooking a right and going up Walnut, taking a left, taking another left, going down Chestnut to get to the Broad Street Parkway. Now they're just coming down Factory Street, going straight across to Chestnut without a stop sign, essentially there.
So for those that are watching us this evening and have no ideas or have a point of reference as to what we may be talking about, in general, Pearl Street will be eastbound. Correct. Temple and where it becomes Factory Street at Main Street will become westbound. And so right now, Factory and Temple meet at each other, and you've got oncoming traffic. So that will be converted to just westbound.
Temple's two-way.
Yeah, I was going to point that out.
Temple for a short period will remain two-way, but just because of local access. But the prevailing flow of traffic will be
Westbound?
Yeah.
So where on Temple Street will it be two-way? Is it just the intersection approaching Main Street?
That's the current design, yes.
So, okay. So generally, Temple and Factory Street are westbound. There's a small portion that will remain two-way traffic. Pearl Street will be completely eastbound traffic. And then there will be a small portion on Hellenic Circle, the oval, which will have to be eradicated so that it will allow you to travel eastbound off of the oval onto Pearl Street. Okay. Is there a, no, it's a loaded question. Is there a reason to have East and West Pearl at that point?
You mean like street naming
Yes,
conventions?
Yes.
You just make it Pearl Street.
That's a great question, actually.
I mean,
Technically, East
from a
Pearl's on the
US
east side, and
From a U.S. postal perspective, I mean, people have their addresses and so forth, but
I bet the fire marshal knows the answer to this.
Sure, yeah, but.
all right. So anyway, the generalization is that eastbound and westbound traffic, and it becomes a complete circular pattern through Pearl and Temple and Factory. Alderman Shoneman.
Thank you. A question I had from a constituent regarding this layout a few weeks ago, maybe a few months ago, was about access from the north end to the Nashua Library. And it looks like, since that portion of Temple Street remains two-way, someone could come down Main Street, turn left on Temple Street, and hook around back to the Nashua Library. Is that correct?
That's how we started out. It's through the detailed conversations that we've had with police and fire. We've made a lot of little tweaks to the roadways over there to address some issues. And so the thing we haven't talked about in this room, but that's developed over time, is the idea and concept that if Temple Street is prevailing westbound, that it creates challenges with leaving Park and Court Street a one-way towards Main Street, heading north and then west. So the suggestion was to reverse it and bring traffic up Park Street to Court Street. And so someone coming from the north end would have two opportunities to get to the library. They could come up Park to Court, or they could go all the way down to East Pearl and take a left.
Okay, Park would be certainly faster for them.
Yeah, probably.
I think it
yeah.
would be an improvement over what they have presently.
Agreed.
Thanks.
Great question.
I apologize. Considering how much we're talking about the physical layout of this, I should have come a little more prepared with some diagrammatic maps. So.
Next time, and I think it would be helpful to absolutely see that. I mean, as you've manipulated based on comments, it certainly, so for example, I didn't realize that a portion of Temple was still two-way. So that would have been helpful to know. So absolutely, we'd love to see a diagram of what your thought process is right now, and then so that we can question that and ask about it. So the question that I was going to ask was, I'm absolutely ecstatic that you've gone out and you've met with constituents and you've had these conversations. I know that a previous meeting, Mr. Veo, that I asked you to provide me with an Excel spreadsheet, and you did that, and I appreciate that. It was very helpful to see who you spoke to and what some of those comments were. Does the spreadsheet that you have right now, is it richer with more detail from additional interactions? So from the sheet that you provided to me months ago?
There's some new content relative to meeting with the Board of Public Works and, ongoing conversation with departments. For
So
example,
not necessarily constituents that you've met with, because you were very specific. You provided with, addresses and names and who you spoke to, and these were their comments. What you're telling me is that your spreadsheet now not only includes those constituents, but now it also includes department conversations.
I I haven't integrated it, but if that's desirable, I can do that. Basically, I've been keeping a file on my computer with all the communication, and so it takes a couple different forms: saved emails, memos, things of that nature. So,
Okay. You mentioned that you've used social media as well. So is that the Civic Sounding Board, or are there other sites that you've utilized?
yeah, primarily just Facebook, relative to interactive conversations. But the Civic Sounding Board, I put it on to a page called Realize Nashua. I posted it on my own page. I think I might have asked community development if they could push it out. And so what happened is, as people were commenting, I was logging those comments in the Excel sheet too.
Okay, all right. Because you said you collected over 400, or it was to a distribution list, or a group of 400.
Yes.
So
That was an email.
that was an email? What group was that?
So I have a newsletter I send out periodically about items of interest to downtown Nashua, either upcoming policy votes.
It was specific to your responsibilities in the
Exactly.
economic
Yes.
development.
Yeah, it's my.
department.
It's like, for lack of a better term, it's my list that I put together.
Okay. All right. I'm happy that you've gone out and had, those personal conversations with the Nashua Senior Center. 30 Temple Street is a vital piece as well. And you've collected a lot of comments, and I'm sensing from what you're sharing this evening that a lot of those comments were positive. Okay. So I guess my question to you would be, what were the negative comments, and how do we overcome those comments specifically? Because that's the opportunity for us to make sure that if we do reverse this, that it's going to be successful. So do you have a sense or what some of the negative feedback was? And do we have a response to that negative feedback?
Sure. Some of it was just outright distrust for government in general. I got some comments that were, the city will do whatever it likes, so why do I care? I just counted that as a negative comment.
How about constructive negative feedback?
Well,
What would you indicate to us is constructive negative feedback that says this is not the best thing to do? And
yeah,
how would we address it?
so at the same time, we were having an internal conversation about the routing in one-way travel of Park and Court Street. I believe his name is Pierre Mon. He runs the bicycle shop on Court Street.
Okay.
He commented to me during my open house walk-in meeting that that trash bins need to be taken into consideration, because 100 Main Street has like 25 City of Nashua trash bins that they put out on the street on a given day, and so they take up 75-foot length of street. And so I don't know what the conditions were that led to a large multifamily building not needing to have a dumpster, but if you set that aside, it's true, we need to take into consideration those trash barrels as part of how we're going to resolve the street design. So that was constructive feedback.
So that would be on Park and Court, right?
Correct.
How does that affect this?
Well, because we were having a more detailed conversation internally, and Piermont just happened to bring this up at the same time about the fact that if you make Temple prevailing westbound, that it would cause traffic problems on Court and Park. And the department...
Was that before we potentially reverse that? Okay.
Exactly.
So regardless of which way Park and Court go, you're going to have the same trash issue.
Exactly, yeah. But I hadn't considered it.
Okay.
I hadn't even thought of it until he brought it up.
All right.
So it was just one more thing to take into the overall design of the street.
Any other things that were real gotchas that we absolutely have to address to make sure that when we introduce this and it goes through capital improvements, that it's ultimately a success.
Yeah, the prevailing piece of feedback that I think is most important, and it's the one I heard the most from the constituents where I knocked door to door with businesses, is don't even think about taking away my on-street parking. My business relies on that on-street parking. And so, as a general rule of thumb, as we look through on a detailed level each of the segments of street within the scope of work, we tried to identify ways that we could add new parking assets along the travel route. And so, there's substantial opportunity for adding spaces here and there along the street where the design renders free right of way.
Okay. So I think when you get to a point where you've actually got, I know that you said that it would be helpful to have some more detailed drawings with, flow and directions and things like that. I think at the same time as you introduce that, it would be helpful to have your ideas as far as, okay, we want to add additional parking stalls, how many additional parking stalls, which zone are they going to be in, do you, things like that. The other thing that I think you were going to say something, but if you'd allow me, one of the things that I've heard is, and please tell me if you've heard this as well in any of your um, outreach, and that is that we are creatures of habit. We are used to driving in one particular way and one particular pattern, and we know that when we change something, there's going to be resistance to it. As you get older, the resistance becomes greater. And so somebody might not, we can do all the communication in the world, and we can say Temple's going to be eastbound predominantly. Somebody's going to travel westbound. And I'm concerned, especially with one of the anchor buildings on the end of Temple, that being the Senior Activity Center, that some of those individuals might not take on this change as readily as some others. What can we do for that community?
It's a great question. And Mr. Chairman, if you would, it's something that's weighed on me as well, because I'm very sensitive to that. I mean, I think what a commitment will have to be from my office, along with community development, along with the senior center, as much as we work with them, to make sure that we communicate effectively through the right channels to that audience. I mean, social media is all well and good, but I don't know if we're going to be reaching that demographic through social media. So it's got to be more than just, posting on Facebook. We're going to have to, some of the things I've been thinking about to move through this issue, doing like a PSA on local cable access for a time period when we're moving forward with this, doing more conversations with the senior center about this. I've even thought about and anticipated that maybe we build in a small little budget for direct communications to seniors. There's no reason why we couldn't send a letter from the city to seniors. We have that information, and we can then bring it to their attention. I think these are things I've been thinking about to resolve that issue. I think inevitably we will hear that concern, and that does concern me.
What about signage? How much signage is included in this proposal?
Have you gotten to that level of? I don't think. I don't know. That's a great question.
We would, I mean, the VHB report is not that in
Detailed.
Yeah. So we really need to go to design.
Right. We would have to
Okay.
go to engineering design before we could even tell you what the signage would be.
Okay.
It would be necessary.
Absolutely would be. And I'm seeing as you exit the senior center that there's a directional arrow that says this way only, something like that. At least, some visual cue. Alderman Lopez, did you have a question or comment?
I'm just going to say, in defense of the seniors, there's plenty of young people who go the wrong way up Kinsley Street all
Agreed.
the time, so it's not an age-specific thing.
So
I think
in-
one thing
in-
is we
in
should make
addition-
sure we adjust the GPSs so that
In
people who are
addition to
just...
that, correct. In addition to that demographic, you can use social media for.
That's right.
Right. So we're going to hit all media on this, and I know that we've got time, but I think it's it's our responsibility to make sure that we're thinking far enough ahead. And, whether it be, the first day that it opens, if we've got police details and directional signs and things like that, that are sort of hitting those major spots, those major intersections, to say, listen, we're going this way instead today.
Right, absolutely.
All right.
I'm sorry, Mr.
Director
Chairman.
Cummings, please.
There is one particular issue that I would be remiss not to address. I thought my good friend and colleague beside me was going to actually raise it, which is 30 Temple Street on occasion has raised some issues. And we're actively trying to address those issues. We want to make sure that we can take into consideration their traffic volume that will be exiting the building and can disperse appropriately throughout the downtown. So how we address that, I don't know yet. We're still working through that. But we will keep their concerns in the forefront of our mind as we're developing our plan.
Because at that point, you're restricting 30 Temple Street's exit only to, so if Park and Court reverse direction,
Yep.
the only way to travel westbound to get to Main Street and to disseminate would be down Temple. And that would cause, if they've got a lot of traffic exiting their building, I'm not sure what their traffic flow is. There could be some backups on Temple Street.
That's right. And so to that point, and I think this will probably be our next conversation. We will bring a visual aid to you and we can get into a more granular detail. But looking at trying to accommodate, the disbursement of the traffic out of 30 Temple so that folks can go left and right and make sure that it flows appropriately in and around that area.
So they've got, I'm thinking about their parking lot, and I know that they've got an upper level, and that exits onto Temple as well as onto Court. And then they've got a lot to the north of their building, and that also disseminates, I think, onto Court as well as to Cottage.
Correct, yep.
Okay. So once you get to Cottage, especially if Temple is all westbound, there aren't many options but to go west, unless you take one side street and go a street over, and then you can head eastbound off of Pearl. But I'm not sure how many people leaving.
I don't know. That's a good question. But what I would believe is most people actually would be traveling east. And so making it convenient and accessible for them to be able to do that is something that we.
You think they'd be heading to Hudson?
I'm sorry, west. They'd be
Okay.
heading
All right,
west.
all right.
We need to make sure that we.
We need to make sure that they can get to Main Street and then
Exactly.
get to the Broad Street Parkway so we can actually have more traffic on the Broad Street Parkway.
Amen.
Alderman Lopez.
Have them drive all the way around the senior center and just stop and say hello.
I'm sure they would appreciate a visit. Alderman Shoneman.
Potato night.
Thank you. I appreciate you guys taking time to reach the constituents and the businesses, because someone is going to come in and say they didn't hear it, they didn't know. So hopefully it'll be a small number. And in the interest of kind of keeping people maybe informed well in advance of some of the other developments that could be coming along, when we talked about this flow months ago, I think we sort of identified that we had the Broad Street Parkway over here to the west, and we've got a lot of people coming in and out of Hudson, and the predominant flow was east-west, as opposed to necessarily north-south down Main Street. And as we facilitate this east-west flow with this loop and maybe get more volume going that way around that loop, and that becomes a parking loop and all that, maybe Main Street becomes less vital as a thoroughfare. And one of the things that we may have talked about here in the meeting, I hope that we did, it was just in the side conversation, was the possibility someday of taking Main Street down to one lane each direction with angled parking. Now, is that something that is feasible or in the planning? Is there something that we can do, or is that just Just so that people, 2 years from now, they don't say, you never told me, because we can say, point to this meeting and say, we're
Listen,
thinking
I
about
don't
it.
think there's anybody here that's interested in answering that question right now, correct, Mr. Veo?
So not one lane, but there are some interesting things that will happen as a result of this project, and I'd like to at least run through that scenario with you guys so you're abreast of it.
I'd like to hear it.
The left-hand turn lane on Main Street changes. So where you go to take a left-hand turn on the West Pearl now moves up to Factory Street. The left-hand turn you take to get onto Temple Street to go east moves up to East Pearl. So what you have now is your left turn is all consolidated into the block where Martha's is. That high street's in the middle of it. And there's a mid-block crosswalk. So what happens on the other ends of those is you no longer have a left-hand turn. So now we have this center strip, this center median that's 9 feet, 10 feet wide, and it's devoid of any value or use. So we do have some opportunities to maybe do some interesting things there. It's possible if the infrastructure doesn't conflict that we might even be able to plant trees or something in that space.
Or pick up parking. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, if I may, we could do many different things. I mean, ultimately, I think, to your point, a road diet is necessary along that corridor. It's something I thought of when I first came to this community. Having that conversation, I think, is necessary, but it should be a separate conversation, and I think it would be an exhaustive one because of the change of culture. I can tell you that as much as I would recommend a road diet, and I think you would not lose level of service, you'd be thinking of the road much differently, and the community would need to take time to adjust to that.
Very good. Alderman Lopez.
As exciting as the opportunity to put a whole row of Lego heads in on Main Street is, that street that you're talking about where all the turning lanes would be, wasn't that also the one where the loop supposedly created the advantage of an easy to close off street? Because then you wouldn't have that advantage anymore.
No, it still exists. And so what Tom and I had a conversation in the past. Yeah, I apologize. Alderman Lopez had this conversation in the past about if you look at the prevailing flow, what it does is it makes it very easy to detour cars. So cars heading northbound on Main Street, if you wanted to have an event on Main Street in the block where Martha's is in High Street, it'd be very easy to create a detour that turned right on East Pearl Street, turned left up Spring Street, turned left again onto Temple, and then turned right again finally back onto Main Street, detour complete. Same thing heading southbound. You'd head it right on Factory, left on Chestnut, left again on a short portion of Central back onto West Pearl, and then a right back out onto Main Street. And so you have very minimal trip diversions for special events, which might make it easy to standardize events on Main Street, which is something we're seeing more and more of. And, anytime we can standardize a process, it reduces costs and increases the capacity for events to happen. And so it's something that is a potential outcome of modification by this project.
I'm glad you brought that up, and if you'd allow me to play off of that. I know that currently East Pearl Street, that's just east of Main, on, I think it's Wednesday evenings, they have movies. Your Chamber of Commerce sponsors movies during the summer. In this scenario, is that a hiccup?
To just pick a different street.
It's possible.
Well, they could pick a different street. I mean, High Street presents itself as a street that really could be closed off and utilized a lot more.
Yes.
It could just be open to pedestrian traffic, and I know that's something that we've talked about, Mr. Veo, correct?
Correct.
All right.
I would love that, yeah.
So, Alderman Lopez.
I just can hear the cab stand on High Street honking angrily right now at the thought of that. But if you had the middle piece that could easily be shut down, one of the most frequent I wish we had downtown that I've heard is a lot of people wish the farmer's market was right on Main Street in front of all those shops, encouraging the shops to be open and whatever. And that would be like a recurring event that would be more easily done under this scenario, because cars that want to go up and down Main Street more of them would be going up and down Main Street because they want to be on Main Street, looking at the shops, looking at the stores and all that, versus the cars that want to go up and down Main Street just to get to the bridge. They could loop around and they wouldn't have to, like, the traffic is being moved east to west. So that creates that bubble, and you could use that central area for events. I think that would be attractive to a lot of events,
You know,
planners and organizers.
I don't want to turn this into a planning and economic development committee meeting,
Mm.
but, you know, there's always the opportunity. I'm not sure what's going to happen in the first floor of the Performing Arts Center. If that, yeah, I've heard ideas or concepts of turning that into, again, depending on what the market bears, into a all-year farmer's market.
Correct.
So, or I'll see, yeah.
Yep.
So there are opportunities, and we've just got to make sure that we don't, you know, make a left when we should be making a right. Any additional comments with regard specifically to the one-way reversal? I thought this was a good conversation. Excellent. All right. Are we ready to shift gears and, you know, go through the mobile pay app?
Yes, sir.
All right.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Veo to talk quickly about this newer concept, which recently came to our attention. As I understand it, at an open office hours for the mayor this summer, and then sporadically throughout the spring, this idea of why doesn't Nashua offer an amenity like mobile pay app for parking meters was brought to our attention, and so we're in the early stages of exploring whether that's feasible or not. And with that being said, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Mr. Veo, to go into a little bit more of the who, what, why, when, where type of details that are being flushed out.
Very good. Mr. Veo?
So I won't read this memo verbatim that's been handed out to you, but essentially what has happened is in various different forums, the idea of pay by cell or mobile application for paying for metered parking has been floated. Most recently, and the one that led to the fruition of exploring this RFP was coffee hour at Jaja Bell's with the mayor, in which property owner Rich Lannon was present and really felt a general positivity towards the idea of having a pay-by-cell app to pay for metered parking in downtown as a convenience for shoppers and residents alike. And so with that in mind, we reached out to the parking department, Jill Stansfield and myself. We reached out to a couple of vendors that offer this service to ask for a tutorial on how it worked. They basically ran through the application with us. They told us how the contract with the city worked. We ended up taking that and asking one of those vendors, Park Mobile, to give a presentation to the Downtown Improvement Committee. And they were generally supportive of the idea, and we're eager to see it progress. And so, just real quick, a couple tenets of it.
So let me just ask you a quick question. Sorry, pardon the interruption.
Not at all.
I'm curious as your thought process as to why you would take this to the Downtown Improvement Committee versus sharing it with a group of aldermen or a committee like this.
So essentially what had happened is at this coffee at the mayor, Richard Lannon is on the Downtown Improvement Committee and suggested in the public forum that that the committee, the Downtown Improvement Committee, review this concept.
Does the Downtown Improvement Committee have any financial or fiscal responsibility?
They have control of surplus parking revenue.
No, they don't. They have the ability to recommend surplus parking revenue, but the financial decisions come down to a committee or a body of aldermen. So, just a slight clarification.
My apologies on that.
No, that's fine. I'm just, so now we've taken what could be a potentially great solution, and you've provided it to a group of members who don't necessarily have fiscal responsibility for the city, but can make recommendations. Okay, so will we be receiving a recommendation from this committee? So no. So have we wasted the vendor's time? Should we have done something else, is all I'm asking. Could it have been, or were you just researching? I don't know.
Mr. Chairman, no, your point is well taken, and one of the reasons why we are here tonight, because
Okay.
I saw this coming together, and I knew coming before you was paramount. There was just genuine enthusiasm and support
Okay.
for this concept, and with, some downtown enthusiasts continuing the conversation, we didn't want to impede that momentum. But with that being said, the idea of bringing forward a mobile app is the purview of the Board of Aldermen, and so that's why I knew we would have this conversation tonight before it progressed any further.
Okay, good. So we've got, when we decided to go forward with whichever vendor we selected for this park and pay stations, we thought that it was a good solution, that it was flexible, that it would provide opportunity to grow. Do they have a mobile app?
To my understanding, they do. The Calais, I believe, does provide, and I suspect they would be one of the respondents to the RFP if we were to put one out.
Okay, so if there is another vendor that comes forward and says, hey, we can provide a mobile pay app for your community, do we have does it talk to, does it interact, does it speak to our current system? Because I can see, if
Oh, I could too.
we've got this park and pay system, I have spot 111, and I go to the parking meter, the park and pay station, and I pay for that spot, and now I've got a mobile app that's a different vendor, and, I've got spot 111. I just see opportunity for,
Conflict.
yeah, and we're trying to make it easy to come to our community and come downtown. So did we reach out to our current pay and park, vendor?
Yeah, I believe we have, yeah. Right?
Yeah. I mean, so it's fairly complicated how it works, and Jill's done a pretty good job in schooling me in this, so I'll do my best to regenerate that information here for you guys. But basically, Calais is the kiosk, the physical machine. Their role really ends once you put the card into the machine and take it back out. Now there's another entity that manages the data in the transaction. Currently, the city uses a company called T2 Flex to do that. The city is actually actively considering, because that contract is coming to an end, going out and seeking a new vendor for that. They're seeking potentially using a vendor called Cardinal, although they're
So
looking at many other options.
So the vendor you're speaking of are they T2 Flex, or is it Calais that they're thinking about?
Calais is the physical machine, and
Right,
it's going to
so-
stay there.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you're talking about the T2 vendor,
Yeah, it's
the
basically just
transaction based.
The point of transaction.
it's basically just Excel sheets. It's a service that provides encrypted data, Excel transactions between two secure cloud data keeping softwares. One for the card company, one for T2 Flex, which feeds information back to the police department for enforcement. And so these mobile pay applications have very cleverly figured out how to overlay their system on top of these without having any effect on the underlying system. It's really quite genius. And so it has no effect on the underlying system. The underlying system will not change whatsoever with the introduction of a mobile pay system. The only thing that happens is new stickers are added where the parking exists, with zone numbers and a small advertisement for Park Mobile. And then people who have the app can just put the zone number into their cell phone, and their license plate data is stored. It's confidentially sent to the city for enforcement, and it's just fed into the same software that the Calais transaction is fed into. And so all that software, all that information is one chunk of software that the enforcement officer can look at in his handheld and determine whether the car is paid or not. What is kind of funny about the mobile pay app is that the physical machine that has the meter reader on it, let's say you're at a coin meter, it will read red. It will read like it's expired, but the enforcement officer will know by looking at the license plate that that person has paid.
So, wow.
It's very complicated, but it makes sense once you kind of. It took me probably 2.5 hours to go through it and figure out how it works.
Generations of pay going into the same place.
I'm thinking that parking enforcement probably needs to be engaged in the conversation as well if they're not already.
Yes.
At some point, we've got, because honestly, you've got to think about their work requirement, and they have walked this beat or however they do it for however long, and they are used to looking at a red or a green, or you've got a ticket in your windshield, and now what's the interaction going to be with this parking enforcement officer? They've got to go to every single stall and look up a license plate that says whether it's expired or not. Not the license plate, but the time that they've reserved that stall.
Yeah, so basically what would happen is, and you're right, we could have enforcement join the discussion, but basically what they would do is they would see an expired meter, they would go into their handheld as if they were going to write up a ticket, and the first step they would do is, they would do this when they were writing up a ticket anyways, is enter the license plate numbers.
So I see that working for a parking meter. How would it work for a kiosk, where you actually get a ticket and you take it back to your vehicle and you put it on your windshield, on your dash?
Yeah, so the meter, the enforcement officer is walking down the street looking for those ticker
Yeah.
tapes in the dashboard. When they find that one is not there, it's the same process. They would pull out their handheld and type in the license plate as if they were starting to write a ticket.
Yep.
And that's the point in which Park Mobile informs them that this person has paid.
Okay. So as this mobile pay becomes much more popular, the opportunity is there to have less people going to kiosks, and you're going to see more vehicles without the display. And that's going to require a parking enforcement officer to, how many spots do we have on Main Street? Do you know off the top of your head?
Yeah, I don't know that number off the top of my head.
Okay, say we've got 100.
Call it 100, yeah.
So we've got 100. Right now, they're all pay and display. And you literally will go by and check it out. And you may have to look at, I don't know, 3, 4, 5, 10% of the vehicles that are on Main Street in 100 spots. And then if this gets popular, you're going to have to look at 100 or 90, 80, 90, a larger percentage of vehicles are going to have less ticket displays, and you're going to increase the amount of time and effort it takes for a parking enforcement officer to look at the same area.
Yes.
Alderman Lopez.
Point out that you could also sort it so that you could see which ones are absent and which ones aren't. And as more people start using this app, you could look at, the parking officer could look and say, oh, look, the whole street's actually paid. And then that saves them time too. I have a lot of faith in people remembering to update their parking meters.
Mr. Veo.
So one thing we did do as we are starting to explore this is we reached out to a couple different communities. I reached out to the town of Urbana, Illinois, who wrote an exceptional RFP, which I would like to use as a template because it was so well written, and asked them what their experience with the program has been to date. We also reached out to Keene, New Hampshire, and Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Keene has a Park Mobile app applied in their community, and Portsmouth is currently considering using Calais on top of their existing Calais kiosk system. And
So Calais' mobile pay system?
correct.
All right.
And so, in general, sentiment is good. The recurring theme we were hearing from practitioners in the field is that it's a customer service asset. It's really about making sure that people who come downtown have the best experience possible. And if they don't have coin or they're not parked in a location where they can't feed paper money or a credit card in, it adds complication to the act of parking in downtown. And so we realized that once you get off of Main Street or out of the city garages, you either can pay with a coin or you can pay with what is a pretty obscure prepay card that will fit into the coin meters. And that doesn't really work for everyone. And so we saw the mobile app as an opportunity to add just one more payment option that would be convenience-based for people looking to come down and park downtown easily and efficiently.
I would tend to agree with you. I think it would be convenient to be able to pull out a mobile application and pay for a spot downtown. I don't want it to be a negative experience as well, and that is we've got to take two things into account post your customer coming in downtown and parking and paying mobily. And that is, one, I don't want them to end up with a ticket if they don't deserve a ticket. And then two, I don't want the parking enforcement to, it's going to change the way that they do their job. And it's going to be more, with exception to what Alderman Lopez says in identifying blocks of stalls, it may be more time intensive in some situations. So,
Absolutely.
Alderman Shoneman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the middle of the page on the handout, it says here, issues. Visitors to downtown Nashua do not always have coins on hand or understand how to function the system. And I'm not sure that changing it makes it any easier to function it. And I'll share my experience. I've told the story, maybe not in one of these meetings for a while, but I was visiting Nashua long before I moved here. And when I was visiting, I had a shop at the hardware store, which is gone, Aubuchon Hardware on Main Street. And I could drive down there, and I could put a nickel in the meter and get all my shopping done. I had a nickel. I knew how to use the meter. It was only a nickel. And I thought that was one of the selling points. Believe it or not, that was one of the selling points of Nashua to me.
We're glad to
was,
have
how cool is
you
this?
here.
Where can you use
I'm
a
glad it
nickel?
only cost us a nickel.
Coming from Somerville?
Coming from Somerville, yeah, where it costs a lot more.
Yeah, yeah.
But we had parking permits and all that sort of stuff in Somerville, which we have now here too. But in terms of making it easy and friendly, there's no place that a nickel is used anywhere in this world anymore. And when I could put a nickel in a meter, it's like, wow, Nashua wants me here. That was the impression. And I know that it's income and all that kind of thing, and maybe it's just longing for yesteryear that keeps me
Director Cummings.
thinking about that, but that's what I think.
And so to that point, it hasn't been raised yet, but similar theme as to our previous conversation. I see this also being a very generational issue, and so making sure that we're always providing the opportunity for seniors or people who are not as technology friendly, the opportunity to pay by coin has to be a priority. I am someone who would never use a mobile app to pay for parking. I would always use coins, and someone who has nickels and dimes and doesn't always have quarters, I too appreciate being able to use those in my meters, because God knows when I go to other communities and they say quarters only, I get rather frustrated. But I digress. The point I wanted to make was I'm very sensitive to our demographics. I know we have a lot of seniors in our community. Making sure that we're always providing them with an opportunity to do to pay by coin has to be a priority.
We appreciate that, us seniors.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I may, this is just the start of the dialogue. I'm hoping tonight to get your comments, feedback, hear some of your concerns. Some of them were raised tonight. The parking enforcement issue, we will definitely loop in, have a conversation with them. But my sense is if things continue to trend in a positive direction, this is something we should be looking to do as an amenity to our downtown. If I'm incorrect in that sentiment, I just want to make sure that that's clarified.
Alderman Shoneman?
I think that you're right about being a generational issue, and there are things that earlier, younger generations want that I cannot imagine using myself. And if we want those folks here too, certainly, and if that's an option, I think we should look into it and see what it costs and how feasible it is and how practical it is and all those kinds of things.
Thank you, Alderman Shoneman. Alderman Lopez?
I feel like we keep picking on the older generation here. The younger generation burned out their phones because they're playing Pokemon, so everyone will appreciate the variety of ways to pay for things. And we also don't want to pay for replacing all of those coin-operated things anyway, so I think this is a good way that if people have the opportunity to use the app, then they can say, oh no, I can't park. If I can't find a space on Main Street, I don't need to dig around for quarters. I can just hit a side street, or vice versa. It gives flexibility of choice based on how many options you happen to have on you. And if you don't have the options, if you don't have any quarters, then it gives you an alternative.
So, Mr. Vale, I don't know if this is possible. It would be great to know if these vendors have the ability to provide you with the closest parking spot available to the location that you're hoping to go to.
Some vendors do and some do not.
So I'm sure that's a premium cost associated with that. But it would be interesting to know. I mean, if I'm going to 229 Main Street, where can I park? Where's the, considering, there's no parking in the back except on Wednesday evenings at my meetings. But where can I park?
Is a value there.
One of the things that does show up that's really interesting, almost all the apps are integrated into like a Google Map-like feature where it doesn't intuitively tell you where to go, but when you start zooming in on the map, little icons pop up and show you where each individual zone is. And so it reads like a map that you could know where public parking is.
Okay.
It just wouldn't natively tell you to go park there.
Alderman Lopez.
Is that something you could look at to see, like, much more accurate up to, like, periodic, where are people parking downtown?
Yeah, that's one of the big benefits we would get out of this system is we would get a whole geo-based set of data constantly flowing in about where people are parking when. It would allow us to better hone capacity.
Great point. The idea of utilizing data to identify where the demand is, and then that could help us drive
Increase rates.
or lower rates to a
Lower
nickel
rates,
so
perhaps,
that
like, oh
people
no,
could actually
Saturdays are
park
dragging a
there.
little bit. Let's make it free.
That's not funny.
So big data. I like the idea of utilizing that to help start driving some of the decisions that we're making with regard to the infrastructure. I was going to ask a question. I don't recall what it was. I'm sorry. All right. Any other questions with regards to either the one-way reversal or the mobile pay app? You'll get some more information on the mobile pay app. You'll share it with this committee and maybe some other committees, but we'll at least be CC'd on the information.
Absolutely.
That would be great. And our next meeting on the 13th, we'll hopefully have some more information about the overnight parking
Yes.
Okay. And then I know at that point, City Clerk Pietza will be back and available to join in that conversation. So that will be helpful. We'll need to make a decision soon so that she can make her purchase for the upcoming year. And we've got to address your gentleman's issue on Norton.
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to take this opportunity, if there's nothing else that you want to share?
Again, Mr. Chairman, we provided one memo. It's not on your agenda this evening. It's more informational and as a status update relative to the East Hall Street Traffic Improvement Program. I'll hand that out to you, really just answer any questions if you have any. Just so you're, again, aware of this coming down the pike.
Jim. Thank you.
Just so you're aware of this coming down the pike. We currently received an RFP. I'm sorry, we recently released an RFP. We received some proposals from engineering construction firms. We're in the process of trying to select and agree on scope. Once that comes to a conclusion, we would start preliminary design for the traffic improvement project. Remind you that this was started back in 2009, 10-ish timeframe. This is being, through a combination of differing funding sources, 100% funded by non-local revenue. So it's 80% federal government, 20-ish% from state revenue.
In no city match.
And no city, so the state is stepping up and providing the city
Okay.
match.
And this is the west side of the bridge into Hudson.
Correct.
So let me ask you this. Thank you for the memo. I'm assuming that any traffic pattern changes or whatever we decide to do on the west side of that bridge is going to affect the east side of the bridge as well. So what types of conversations are we having with Hudson? And should we be having more? And should they be part of, should I invite them to this committee?
That's a great question, Mr. Chairman. Ironically enough, that was actually a big talking point earlier this week when the internal project management team for the city met. And at that meeting, because we're still very early developing scope, selecting an engineer, we thought it would be best to ask the town of Hudson to actually be a representative onto the professional staff internal project management team that's, for lack of a better word, a little steering committee that's made up of Mr. Veo, Director Marchant, Mr. Husband, myself, and then we were thinking it would be appropriate for a representative from the town of Hudson, probably their town engineer, to be a critical voice in that discussion, because we see your point and we agree that Hudson has to be part of the conversation.
Great. So I'm happy to, as you engage the town of Hudson and invite them to participate on your particular steering committee, I'm still open, if the timing is appropriate, to invite them to a larger infrastructure committee meeting.
Absolutely.
All right,
Yeah, absolutely.
all right, very good. So any additional comments from economic development tonight? We appreciate your time and your conversation. It was very enlightening. Lots of good directional information and lots of exciting things that are happening. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Are you guys going to, Director Cummings, are you going to be around for
I
a
am.
while?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
So we are at communications. I know that we accepted Mr. Cutter's communication earlier. I'd like to, at this point, accept these three communications just received from, let's see, they are all from James Veo, Downtown Specialist Economic Development Division, addressed to myself, Alderman Mark Cookson, Chair of the Infrastructure Committee. The first one is with regard to the reversal of one-way travel on specific streets in downtown Nashua. The second communication is in regard to pay-by-cell services for metered parking in downtown Nashua. And the third communication is infrastructure improvements at the intersection of Bridge Street and East Hollis Street. Is there any discussion on that motion to accept and place on file? Alderman Lopez.
Can we just pretend they were stapled together, or do we have to do them individually?
I'm going to do them individually,
Okay.
but I can make it all in one motion.
Oh, okay.
So they are in a motion stapled.
Hypothetically stapled.
Yes.
Okay.
Alderman Shoneman, you good?
I'm good.
All right, very good. The motion is to accept and place on file. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Very good. Those have been accepted and placed on file. Unfinished business, there is none. New business, there is none. There is a piece of legislation that's tabled in committee with regard to allowing permitted overnight on-street parking on a portion of Ash Street. It was endorsed by Alderman Wiltshire and Clemens. I thought we had addressed it by combining it with another piece. Do we just want to leave it tabled until the end of the term and then let it die, or do we do indefinite postponement? Alderman Lopez.
I don't know that we have to let it die. I think we allowed for permits to be purchased there, and then we could see how the plan's going to go, and I mean, address it then once
Okay.
economic development has
We'll
what their
just,
plan
we'll just
is.
leave it tabled then. All right, very good. General discussion this evening? Alderman Shoneman?
Thank you. In addition to the two things I mentioned earlier, which we were able to talk about because economic development was here, that's overall parking on Main Street and the Norton Street parking permits. I want to raise something. We're not going to deal with it tonight, but just to alert you to the fact that something's going to be coming in. Beeson Street, I received in the last couple of weeks, two traffic issues were raised by two different constituents on Beeson Street. Beeson Street runs off of Concord Street, and it parallels Cortlandt Street. And when we put the stop signs in Cortlandt Street a number of years ago, before I was on the board, to reduce some of the cut-through or slow it down a little bit, folks doing what they do found other routes. And one of the routes that they found was Beeson Street down to Edson, then cut over to Cortlandt, then down around Tolles. Couple extra turns, but it's a cut-through. And as cut-throughs go, the traffic tends to be a little bit heavier, or get heavier, and a little bit faster. One of my constituents who lives at the corner of Berkeley and Beeson, his grandson was out riding a bicycle a couple weeks ago, and he got hit by a car. Fortunately, no serious injury. It could have been disastrous. I'm not sure if the police were notified. I don't know. But that did happen, and it's because that Berkeley Street, it's a lot of people use Berkeley to walk to Greeley Park rather than walking on Concord Street. And here it is, they're crossing Beeson, which is now a cut-through street. And so his question to me was, is it appropriate to have a stop sign on Beeson at Berkeley? So I emailed a member of the Public Works Commissioner to pursue that with the Streets Department, and I'll be working on that. Also on Beeson Street, at Raymond Street, if you go down Beeson Street heading towards Edson, it's fairly level until you get just past Raymond Street, then the hill drops off very steeply. And it's so steep, in fact, that your sight lines are dramatically reduced. Where you're, on the first part, you're doing 25, you can see pretty far, but if you're doing 25 at that crest, you can't see anything. And same coming up, it rises so quickly and transitions so abruptly that you're driving most people are driving much faster than their ability to stop, not because they're speeding, but because the hill transitions so quickly. So their question to me was, is it appropriate to have a stop sign at Raymond on Berkeley? The only street between, on Beeson at Raymond, the only street between them would be Chester. So it could potentially be a stop sign on Beeson at Berkeley, and then 2 short blocks later, a stop sign at Raymond. We don't use stop signs for traffic calming. That's not what it's for. But these issues, while there's a traffic calming issue, These issues, I think, are more safety related. We have an actual accident that occurred due to increased foot traffic and bicycle traffic and that kind of thing on Berkeley Street that conflicted with cut-through traffic on Beeson. And then we have the Hill, which if traffic is light and people are driving slow, we can deal with the Hill. The Hill's been there for many, many years. But now with increased traffic and speeds, that Hill can be a problem. So I've referred both of those to Public Works, and we may be seeing some legislation regarding stop signs in the future. I just wanted to raise that now and let folks at home know that we're concerned about those kinds of things.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Lopez, anything tonight?
I have nothing.
All right, I'll share two things with the committee. I'll start with the overnight parking program. I was notified that there was a constituent that had received multiple parking tickets over in French Hill. And the parking tickets indicate that that the vehicle was not parked in a designated spot. So this person went to the police and said, well, I was parked in a designated spot, and the stalls were painted, and that's where my vehicle was. And the police said, oh, that's not for overnight parking. So somewhere there is a communication breakdown between the stalls that we have designated for overnight parking and the enforcement of those stalls for overnight parking. So I've taken it upon myself. I've reached out to city clerk. I've identified that this person has the ability to purchase overnight parking. I have proof that the vehicle was parked in a designated stall. And my next course of action is to engage Chief Lavoie at the police department to find out what is going on with the enforcement of those overnight parking stalls. So that is one situation. Number two, and probably more concerning to me, is I had the opportunity to drive on the Broad Street Parkway today twice, round trip. The first time was this morning at about 8 o'clock, a little bit after 8 o'clock. And as I'm heading away from downtown toward Broad Street, and I had just gotten onto the Broad Street Parkway, it was probably near the Fairchild overpass. Fairmont, thank you.
Okay.
Baldwin and Fairmont.
Yeah.
Fairmount, technically.
Mount. Thank you. I had a vehicle pass me. Completely blind to oncoming traffic heading toward downtown. And, again, the posted speed limit on the parkway is 30 miles an hour. So somebody wanted to travel a little bit quicker than I did this morning. This afternoon was even more concerning to me because I was traveling with two young children. And it was right around, it would have been past the Baldwin overpass. I had another vehicle pass me on a double yellow line. Again, traveling 30 miles an hour, and somebody decided to pass me. The second person that passed me was unfortunately met with a Nashville Police Department officer that was traveling in the opposite direction just as she passed me. And they turned on their lights and turned around, and I'm assuming enforced the law because there were at least 5 cars that were traveling in the other direction, and she didn't clear my car by much. So again, I would hope that people would abide by the speed limit. Give yourself a couple extra minutes if you're in a rush. And please don't put anybody else in danger with the actions that you take. These were two situations. I was just floored that, that I was passed on a double yellow line. So those were my comments. Alderman Lopez.
I'd just like to say it's fortunate that Nashua PD did intervene, because one of the most regular complaints and concerns of the parkway is people go down that and then go flying into the tree streets where people are living. Like kids are pushing their tricycles around
Yep.
or chasing their tiny dog or whatever. And when you're driving in your car, you can very easily just be focused on where you're going to and not where you are and what's going on. So
Agreed.
I think it's fortunate the police can disrupt that zoning where you're like, oh, I got to get to whatever, and say, well, do it safely.
Thank you, Alderman Lopez. All right, public comment, no need to have that this evening as no members of the public are here. Remarks by, any additional remarks by Alderman?
Nope.
There is no need for a non-public this evening. Do I have a motion? Alderman Lopez.
Motion to adjourn.
The motion by Alderman Lopez is to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. We are adjourned at 8:37 PM. Thank you very much and have a wonderful evening.